12 malaria-related deaths and over 800 malaria cases have been recorded in South Africa's Limpopo province since April last year. Health Department spokesperson Neil Shikwambana says 2 of the deaths were recorded after last month's floods. Shikwambana says that risk of malaria transmission has significantly increased due to the heavy rains. Malaria symptoms include fever, headache, nausea, diarrhea, and flu-like symptoms. Shikwambana has urged residents to take preventative measures and to seek early treatment.
Since the start of the current financial year on the 1st of April 2025, the province has recorded over 830 malaria cases and 12 fatalities, highlighting the ongoing public health threat caused by malaria. Sadly, 2 of these malaria fatalities have been reported now after the end of heavy rains that we've just received as a province. As a response, the department is ramping up its malaria preventative measures, such as the resumption of the indoor residual spraying in susceptible communities, as well as breeding source reduction to curb mosquito populations.
South Africa's International Relations and Cooperations Minister Ronald Lamola has lambasted those criticizing action taken against the Israeli Deputy Ambassador to South Africa, Ariel Sitman. Lamola says DECO had a number of engagements last year with Sitman to try and to express its view on the constant attacks that he directed at President Cyril Ramaphosa and the government. He also indicated that Pretoria will not drop its International Court of Justice case against Israel.
We have not taken the decision lightly. It was after repeated misconduct by the charge d'affaires of the Israel embassy, who was called to DERCO many times last year as a demarche to call the diplomat to order to behave in a manner that the guests and diplomats are supposed to behave through the protocols and the Vienna Convention, how it guides us.
Lastly, another round of U.S. brokered talks on ending the war in Ukraine has begun in Abu Dhabi. The 2-day trilateral meetings come after President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia had exploited a U.S.-backed energy truce last week to stockpile munitions, attacking Ukraine with a record number of ballistic missiles. The BBC's Sasha Shitta.
Early on in the war, an emboldened Kremlin amended the constitution, claiming Ukraine's Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions were all Russian territory. Now officials mostly just mention Donetsk. But even there, Russia will struggle to take the last 20%, with the cities of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk having been turned into fortresses. So Moscow is probably bluffing when demanding Kiev hands it over. Few are holding their breath for a tangible result in Abu Dhabi. So if the talks fail, it'll be back to Russia's fallback option, bombing Ukraine's population into submission, cutting off heating to thousands of homes in the coldest days of winter.
Recapping on your top stories, the Sudanese army says it has broken a year-long siege on the city of Kadugli on the South Kordofan state. This could potentially give tens of thousands of people a reprieve from famine and may also signal a shift in the war's momentum. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Tsinzi.
SABC News. The African perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Craig Buzz offer free coverage of Team USA matches at the ICC T20 World Cup, while the African Beach Soccer Union details the state of its finances. More at 4:30.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
It is exactly 6 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. A very good Wednesday to you, Africa. It is the 4th of February 2026. Here's what we've got in store coming up for you today. Tanzania plans to increase its total spending by 10% in the year 2026. And we speak to APSA about South Africa's readiness for a large-scale transition to new energy vehicles. That and a whole lot more coming up for you on Africa in Business this afternoon.
Africa in Business. Africa in Business delivers key insights and real-time updates on Africa's growing markets with Thami Ngubeni. The African Perspective on Channel Africa.
Channel Africa.
It is exactly 7 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. We start here today with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He pushed back against claims by US President Donald Trump that Ethiopia's massive new hydroelectric dam was funded by the United States. The $4 billion Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, built on a tributary of the Nile River, is set to generate more than 5,000 megawatts of electricity, making it the largest power-producing dam in Africa. But the project remains highly contentious. Egypt, which is a close ally to the United States, relies on the Nile for nearly all of its water supply. They've warned that the dam poses an existential threat. Channel Africa's economics reporter, Innocent Samosa, has more.
Speaking on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos last month, President Donald Trump repeated the claim, saying the dam was financed by the United States and that it effectively blocks the Nile. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed rejected that assertion, telling Parliament that the project was built without loans or financial assistance from any foreign country. From an economic standpoint, what does Ethiopia's decision to self-finance the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam say about its fiscal capacity and long-term development strategy? Economics professor at the Tshwane University, Mulatu Fek Atuzorion, weighs in.
So in a country of such a big population and ancient nation in Africa, the sad thing is more than 60% of the population has been living in darkness, no electricity, no power supply, especially in a rural part of the country. So from economic standpoint, Ethiopia's decision to largely self-finance the grant. By the way, every Ethiopian, young and old, men and women, they financed it from their meager resources. Everyone across the board. So it signals, this great dam signals a deliberate assertion of fiscal sovereignty. You see, sovereignty is everything about. Sovereignty is important.
While he acknowledged the significance of the achievement, he says it was not an easy task.
So given the politics, the water politics in the region, it was very hardly to secure a fund. Therefore, Ethiopia is determined to finance this big mega project by themselves. It's a symbolic for Africa as well. Together, the current government is following Madamar philosophy, meaning coming together, synergy. It means together we can do more. Together we can do better.
Professor Fek Aduzorion says this can reshape regional economic relations in the Nile Basin.
First of all, this Nile is the largest river in the world. It has been connecting east and north of Africa. That's supposed to create a natural bond between the Nile countries, the Nile Basin countries. It's supposed to be, a bond to hold all the countries, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, all the other countries together. It's a natural bond. Otherwise, given the colonial history, Egypt has been using Nile in a monopoly power, which is not acceptable in a current context. So to avoid a zero-sum game in this dispute, Ethiopia can utilize Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, for hydroelectric generation, because as mentioned before, 60% of the population living in the darkness, no electricity, and it is really disastrous.
For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Samosa in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We turn our focus now to Tanzania, where the Finance Minister Khamis Musa Omar announced that the country plans to increase its total spending by 10% to $24.29 billion in the upcoming fiscal year. The move comes as the East African nation faces heightened financial pressure to fund development projects following the withdrawal of budget support from key partners, including the United States and the European Union. Minister Omar also projected that the economy would expand by 6.3% in the year 2026. This would be up from 5.9% the previous year. For more on this, we joined on the line by an economist based in Kenya, Francis Sang. A very good afternoon to you, Francis. Good to have you with us on Africa in Business. Welcome.
Thank you, Thami. Thank you for having me.
So let's start off, Francis, by looking at the potential impact that this 10% increase in government spending would have on Tanzania's economy.
Okay, the 10% increase will have an impact on the funding, because now Tanzania has to scramble to see where to get the funding now that they already have a deficit with the withdrawal of the funding from US and the EU. And there are sectors that are currently being hurt by the withdrawal of that funding. Like Tanzania is going big on development. They have two major projects that they are doing. That is the Julius Nyerere hydropower plant, and also they're extending their SGR. Now, taking into account that the aid from US you mainly used to cater for the health system, because there will be a disruption in the health system and also in the NGO operation, which will cause job losses. So the increase in expenditure means that Tanzania have to be creative and look for ways of generating revenue in order to fund this deficit and also to continue with the operations of the country.
We heard the finance minister also projecting that the economy would grow by 6.3% in this current year. Could this growth and this projection be linked to the planned higher government expenditure and spending?
Growth is mainly linked to the higher spending, which they expect to yield benefits in the long term. Because when you look at this spending and the finances that will go into this spending are very significant. Completion of the power plant, the project at River Rufiji. Also, they are turning the industrialization, for example, turning Bagamoyo into an economic zone, and also extending the SGR. So this means that the expenditure, which will be in millions of dollars into these sectors, is what will cause the growth. Previously, the target growth was 8%, because the minister has even slashed it from 8% to 6.9%.
So this level of spending, is it likely to lead to higher inflation, or will it be sustainable given the projected economic growth rate?
We cannot say that it will be sustainable, but what we can say, number one, Tanzania has potential. The main potential areas when you look at Tanzania has really grown in the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector of Tanzania in the previous years has really grown. And I think they are now number 2 in terms of producing and exporting maize in the country. And the government is really doing a lot to have a positive impact on the agricultural sector. Number 2, when you look at the mining sector, so Tanzania has the potential to generate this revenue, but it hasn't been tested because many things have to go into place. And already with the withdrawal of the donation by EU and the US, it's already putting a strain on the Tanzanian shilling, which leads to a devaluation of the Tanzanian shilling. So it's a situation which we are waiting to see, yet to be tested, although the country has potential to generate this revenue, mainly by shifting from aid to trade, because Tanzania as a country is blessed with minerals. They have tourism. They have a number of national parks, I think even more than what Kenya has. So it has potential in this sector. And currently, when you look at Tanzania, the leading industry by sector is the service industry. But I believe that if they tap into something like agriculture, looking at the potential that they have in terms of land mass, agriculture can even do much more compared to what it's earning for Tanzania right now. Thank you.
Right. I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned there, the withdrawal of funding by the likes of the United States and the EU. Obviously, that leaves a huge gap in the funding model for Tanzania. Which other funders can plug that shortfall, especially because spending is scheduled to increase by 10%? Where is that extra 10% going to be coming from?
The extra 10% will mainly come from borrowing, because now there's no aid. Tanzania will have to borrow, because currently, when you look at the national debt to GDP ratio, it's at 48%, which is quite stable for a country like Tanzania. It's around 48%. But now if they go into extra borrowing, there's that strain that will come in, because they'll have to borrow before they start generating internally. Because, before you start generating, you have to put the infrastructure in place to enable you generate internally. So Tanzania will have to increase its foreign and domestic debt. And the alternative funders, one of them I think will be the IMF and World Bank. Maybe the government will get into discussions with the IMF and World Bank to see if they can strike a deal on how to get funding for this development now that aid is gone.
Let's wrap up, Francis, with looking at what the potential risks are in this external borrowing, these external loans from the likes of the IMF and the World Bank.
The main risk is default. And when you borrow, you spend, and you're unable to pay, chances are you'll get into a default. We've seen an African country that has gotten into a default, and that is Ghana in the recent times. The impact it had on the country, in a way, it's like you lose your sovereignty once you default on debt. But looking at the current state of Tanzania, looking at that risk, there's still a lot of potential. But for this potential to be harnessed and for it to be productive, then good governance has to be key in Tanzania. So Tanzania is like it's in a catch-22 situation, because they need to do this development in order to develop the country, to spend, especially in development. Now they have to borrow. They have to borrow also to finance the operations, but they still have this opportunity known as the resources that they have to tap into and utilize more than they are right now.
Mr. Francis Sang,
a risk.
It certainly is, but it's a risk, as you say, with the opportunities on the flip side of it as well. We thank you so much for your time and your insight this afternoon, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's Francis Sang, economist based in Kenya. He takes us to exactly 20 minutes after 4.
África. Conhece o Ntivani?
Claro que sou eu.
Ntivani é o amante da música de corpo e alma.
Eu amo música africana.
Ele aprecia todos os tipos de melodias e passa os seus dias a ouvir a Channel África. Okay. Adivinha só, a Channel África quer ajudar o Ntivani e os amantes da música em todo o lado a descobrir ainda mais música incrível. Por isso, a Channel África está a convocar artistas africanos a submeterem as suas músicas. Músicos, lembrem-se de nos dar todas as informações relevantes no music@channelafrica.co.za. As submissões são a vossa oportunidade de ser ouvidos, mas não garantem inclusão na lista. Todas as submissões serão cuidadosamente analisadas para verificar se cumprem os requisitos da nossa estação. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
Now, this certainly is a very big story at 22 minutes after 4 p.m. and it's all around the company We Buy Cars. It is South Africa's vehicle buying and selling service. They announced, and it was announced by the co-founders and the co-CEOs, Van and Dirk van der Walt, that they've sold approximately $54.3 million worth of shares in their company, We Buy Cars. This move is aimed at personal investment diversification as well as estate planning, and it marks the first share sale since We Buy Cars listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange on the 11th of April in 2024. The company was founded in 2001 and now operates around 18 vehicle supermarkets and more than 100 buying pods. Now, if you are within the South African area, you'll certainly understand how these buying pods look like. A really innovative, strategy where in various shopping malls, you just find them there, a little container that's branded We Buy Cars and oftentimes looks like a car itself, making it very easy for consumers to interface with the brand. Reportedly, they've had trades over 15,000 cars a month across South Africa. So let's delve deeper into this company as well as their recent moves and this $54.3 million sale of shares. And for this conversation, we joined on the line by Viv Govender, a portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Good to have you with us, Viv. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Really impressive when you look at We Buy Cars. It doesn't seem like very long ago when we were talking about their first listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange less than 2 years ago. And now, what a massive, sale of shares by the company. Talk to us about the reasoning behind this and why this was a good time for them to do this, if it was indeed.
Well, firstly, the share price has been reasonably high, and even with the current pullback. If you look at where it was back in 2024 in April, it was about 20 rands a share. Now it's about 42, and at the peak, it had gone close to 60. So when you see that kind of movement happening, and you own a lot of shares, it's often worth it just getting rid of some of them, just to diversify your portfolio, de-risk yourself. The ultimates in the fact that they are talking about estate planning, etc. So these kind of things are things you'd normally do. The only negative here is that we've had some negative reports recently about the company being under a little bit of pressure because of competition from Chinese producers and so on. And so you really don't want to be seeing a founder or someone that has controlling interest or not controlling, but have a disproportionate interest in the management of a company, selling shares when we're about to have bad news being released.
Do they still have a controlling stake?
I don't think they do at the moment, but I do think that they obviously have a disproportionately large stake, and they do have a disproportionately large, ability to, obviously influence the company as well.
And how were investors affected by this? What was investor sentiment following this sale, and how did the share price react?
Look, we have seen the share price come down quite a bit here. If you look at the share price, for instance, in the last, say 5 days or so, it's down 15%. Month to date, it's down only 10%. That's because it had a bit of a rally at the start of the year. But peak to peak, from the peak it had basically in the middle of the month till now, is down almost 20%. And so shareholders are probably not looking at this too favorably. Today, it's down about 4% at the moment.
Right. And how does this compare to the share sale patterns of other recently listed tech or automotive companies in South Africa? So if we're comparing pairs to pairs and apples to apples, how does this compare?
Well, I can't really think of another one. We might look at maybe to say something like Discam or something, or you might look at, some of the other guys out there. But really, this is... I don't think you can do another exact comparison to a tech company I should say, because we don't have that many in South Africa that you could say is comparable to what we see when We Buy Cars. Internationally, we have seen cases like this here where people that are involved in the management of the company, founders, etc., do often act in advance of negative news, which is never giving a good taste in shareholders, mouths, because the one thing you want to see with somebody that does have a big stake in a company who's still directly involved in management and so on, is that you want them to be all in or buying in, and you don't want them to see them de-risking themselves, because what does that mean for their exposure to the company, etc.
You mentioned this a bit earlier on, the decline, even year on year, in the share price. And in the last 7 trading days, the We Buy Cars share price has plummeted by 16.75%. What would you highlight as the main reasons that could have led to the company's market value decline?
I think it's twofold. I mean, like year on year, it's still slightly up at the moment. I think it's up like less than 1% right now. So year on year, it's still up slightly, but obviously down significantly, like I said, from highs. From the middle of last year, we're talking about like June or something, so now it's down 25%. For the first month, from the high for this month alone is down 20%. Look, I think that there's twofold. One is the fact that, we don't everybody is seeing insiders selling. Insiders selling, they usually have more information than you do, and therefore it's usually not a good sign for the value of the company. When you see an insider, someone that, even if they're allowed to do that, the rules say they can do that. When somebody knows more about the company than you do, and they want to sell that company, it probably is a good idea not to be in that company. The second thing is that we have seen, like I said, pressure coming through from these Chinese automakers, and these guys basically. I don't know if you've seen I mean, obviously you must have in South Africa, seen a massive uptick in sales for these Chinese companies. Names that we didn't know 5-10 years ago: Omoda, Chery, JQ, etc. Now, we're seeing on the road all the time. And when you have these new car companies coming into play, there's two things. Firstly, obviously, they're new, so people are not basically going to be, in need of used cars as much. And when they come in at such a low valuation, I mean, you look at the price on some of these cars compared to, even used car prices for the traditional brands. Often you could buy a new car with more features for almost the same, or in case sometimes even less than you get a used car from a traditional or a more familiar brand name out there.
I'd like us to close off, Viv, by perhaps reflecting on a larger scale on the second-hand market for automobiles in South Africa. What we are seeing with We Buy Cars, is that going to be a trend, do you believe, especially with the influx of much cheaper vehicles coming in, from the likes of China? Are we going to be seeing a greater decline in the share price of companies like We Buy Cars, for example?
I think it's possible. Look, I mean, South Africa has had a very strong used car market for quite some time. Just because, of course, we want vehicles, but we are not as rich as some other parts of the world, and therefore we keep our vehicles for longer. We buy, used cars more often. It remains to be seen, especially with things like EVs coming into the market, because EVs are very different from like a traditional car. Traditional car, 10 years later, it could kind of go the same way. I mean, there might be some kind of weakening in the engine and so on. An EV, basically, the battery does have a lifespan, a limited lifespan, like your phone battery does, and so it makes you wonder, if we have a larger EV market out there, will it be the same kind of used car market as we see with, for instance, the current, ICE internal combustion engine vehicles? And that's number one. Number two, obviously, the reason that we have such like I said, a strong used car market is because the economy is weak and people can't afford to buy new cars. If the economy picks up, it might actually be negative for the used car market because people might be going for some of these cheaper, new cars at the moment.
Well, we'll leave it at that for this afternoon. Viv Govender, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's Viv Govender, Portfolio Manager at Rand Swiss. He takes us to exactly 4:30 p.m. Central African Time. Let's head over now to the markets desk where Chanduko Legege is standing by with your latest market indicators.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. $1 is trading at 15 rands 98 in South Africa, Botswana 13.22, Namibia 15 Namibian dollars 98, Zambia 19 kwacha 61. Kenya, the dollar is 128 shilling 36, Ethiopia 155 birr 51, Uganda 3,000 shilling 550, Tanzania 2,000 shilling 571, $1 in Nigeria is 1,000 naira 393, Egypt 47 Egyptian pound, in Tunisia 2 dinar 86, Algeria 128 dinar 99, Morocco 9 dirham 03. Angola 912 kwanza, the Congolese franc is 2,127. Commodities, gold is at $5,046, platinum at $2,290 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil at $67.57 a barrel. That is all from me. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 0811-714-4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
It is exactly 4:32 Central African time. Let's head over to the sporting desk where Musibudi Makura is standing by for you for the latest from the world of sport and business.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Thami. A very good afternoon from the Sports Day. So, Willow by Crick Buzz announced that it will offer free coverage of Team USA's matches in the ICC Men's T20 World Cup. This on YouTube, marking the first time World Cup matches will be available at no cost to viewers in the USA as well as the Canada on the platform. Now, the tournament will run from the 7th of February to the 8th of March. Coverage will begin on the 7th of February. Matches will then be streamed free on YouTube through Willow's partnership with the platform. Now, the same matches will also be available free on Willow and Crick Buzz. And as part of this initiative, Willow has partnered with John Boy Media to produce an alternate creator-led telecast to select matches. Now, Willow says the alternate telecast is intended to complement the traditional broadcast by providing a much more conversational format while also retaining cricket analysis as well as context. Well, Carlos Alcaraz is now 5th among the ATP highest earners after his Australian Open win over this past weekend. Of course, along with the iconic silverware, Alcaraz received a significant financial reward for his efforts on the court. He now boasts total career earnings of just over $68 million, which means he is now ranked in 5th place in the ATP all-time money list. Alcaraz has already earned $2.7 million in the 2026 season, in which the world number one has a 7-0 win-loss record. Now, the African Beach Soccer Union recently hosted its annual general meeting in January. The continental mother body of sport reviewed the last season and also previewed this year's calendar. Financial status is always a critical subject on the agenda. AB Masondo, who is the president of the African Beach Soccer Union, gives an overview of the organization's finances and also proposed budget for the 2026-2027 year.
We are running on a very tight budget, and also we are approaching certain companies to also come on board and sponsor our programs, especially right now, since we will be introducing the Interclub zonal competition and the Africa Winners' Cup. We will really need, the corporate to rally behind this sport and also make sure that they invest in this sport. They put in money, and the return on investment is very huge. We just need to sit down and structure it properly.
On to Formula One news now. Cadillac has reaped the reward from its signing of Sergio Perez by landing one of the Mexican's driver's long-term partners. Now, Perez has been heavily supported throughout his Formula One career by the plethora of major Mexican brands, leading to America Morval opting to partner with Formula One's newest team. The Mexican telecommunications giant will be represented by its familiar names Telcel, Infinitum, as well as Claro, which will be on the cars as well as the paddock. Now, Cadillac's global head of commercial strategy, Tyler Epp, said they are delighted to welcome America Morval to the Cadillac Formula One team at this exciting stage of the journey. And finally, James Harden is set to join the Cleveland Cavaliers from the Los Angeles Clippers, with Darius Garland moving in the opposite direction after the sides agreed a trade. Harden, 36 years of age, is an 11-time NBA All-Star and regarded as one of the greatest guards in the history of the game, but he has never won an NBA title. Although the deal is yet to be confirmed by the NBA, Harden said the opportunity to win a first championship was key in deciding to move. As part of the trade, the Clippers secured a second-round pick for this year's draft. And that brings the time to 16:37 p.m. Central African Time. It's a wrap of your afternoon sports news right here on at Newsroom Africa, or rather on Channel Africa. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, do send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call. The newsroom line is +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. African enterprise meets global opportunity. Africa in business on Channel Africa. We are on OpenView's audio bouquet. Channel 628. Are you fluent in French, Chinyanja, Portuguese, and Kiswahili? Are you passionate about radio? And are you looking to work in South Africa? Do you have papers that qualify you to work in South Africa? In that case, we might have an opportunity for you to work for Channel Africa. Send us your CV and demo at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Remember, if you don't hear from us within 14 days, it means you have not made it or you have not been selected. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa in business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 38 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. The 2026 World Government Summit, held alongside the World Laureates Summit, is currently underway in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. The summit, hosted under the theme Shaping Future Governments, brings together governments, international organizations, thought leaders, as well as private sector executives from across the globe to advance international cooperation. Speaking during one of the sessions, Patrick J. McGuinness, author of Fear of Missing Out, posed a pointed question. He asked, are governments leading with a clear strategy, or are they merely reacting to FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, and FOBO, which is the fear of a better option in an increasingly fast-changing world? And he now joins us on the line to unpack this further. A very good afternoon to you, Patrick. Good to have you with us on Africa in Business.
Thank you so much, Thami. It's great to be here.
What is it that led you to ask this question? It's a very probing, it's a self-reflective, introspective question that can also often put governments at a point of vulnerability. What drove you to this point of asking this?
Well, it is a very human question. And at the end of the day, our governments are comprised of people. And as the person who coined the term, invented the term FOMO, I see FOMO everywhere I look. And my role in my work is really trying to explain to people that FOMO isn't something frivolous, or FOBO isn't something frivolous. It is at the root of decision making. And if we identify it in places, we actually do have the tools to address it. So it's important for us to look for it, spot it, and then determine how we can make better decisions as a result.
Perhaps let's start with the basics here. Let's backtrack a little bit and understand what these two concepts really mean and how they exhibit themselves. So if you could break for us FOMO, the fear of missing out, and FOBO, the fear of a better option, what those actually mean and how they manifest themselves.
Absolutely. First of all, FOMO it's a psychological phenomenon in which we perceive opportunity, something good, and then we compare ourselves to others. We see them doing that thing. And as a result, we are tempted to pursue this thing, and it changes our behavior. And so what happens when we have FOMO is that we are convinced that we want to do something. But the problem is we may not actually want to do that thing. We're just doing it because other people are. So we think about it in terms of parties and social media, but it could be regulating AI. Or it could be entering into a cryptocurrency regime. It plays out in that kind of way. At the same time, FOBO is fear of a better option. The idea there is that you have acceptable options in front of you, but because you're looking for the perfect option, you delay decision-making, hoping you will find something that is riskless. But we all know there is no such thing as a riskless decision because we never know what is coming down the line. So when we have FOBO, the problem is that we end up not taking any decisions and waiting, and then we are stuck. And of course, we see that all the time with governments who, for example, Brexit in the UK, they knew what they needed to do, but it still took 2 prime ministers, 3 deadlines, and 3 elections to actually enact Brexit.
So in your view, can FOMO ever be a positive force in influencing policy direction?
FOMO is great for one reason. It is that it alerts us to opportunity, and it is sort of like the tap on the shoulder to say, you know what? It is worth your time to study, to learn about it, consider doing something. So that is the good part of FOMO. The bad part of FOMO is when a person does not then do the due diligence that's required to say, does this make sense? And that's what we tend to see these days with, for example, AI. People are excited about AI, rightfully so, but in that excitement, they aren't asking the hard questions and saying, how do we do this the right way? Instead, they're moving quickly. And many times, speed comes at the cost of wisdom.
So in your address, you referred and you spoke to this, this FOMA, I think that's how you pronounce it, and you've just alluded to it now, the fear of missing out when it comes to AI. Now, given the rapid pace of change in areas like artificial intelligence, how should leaders decide when to act and when to wait for more information?
So there are a couple of very simple tests that you can apply. And these are the kinds of things that you could do in your own personal life, by the way, to know whether you have FOMO or not. The first is to say, if I am enacting a policy, am I doing that because I have thought deeply about my objectives and my values, and that is why I'm doing it? Or am I doing it because the country next door has done that thing? And that is it's an easy test. But what we're tending to see with some of these new policies is that one country does something, and then countries that compete with them say, I don't want to fall behind, and they basically copy paste a policy. And so they're not doing the work that our governments are supposed to do, which is to step back and choose wisdom over speed. And so that basic test will keep us out of trouble. At the end of the day, it is the job of policymakers to formulate a thesis, to test that thesis, and then to put something into place that makes sense. And then, of course, over time, adjust that thesis and adjust policy that goes along. If somebody comes in saying they have the right answer before they've gone through that process, we are in an area where FOMO is definitely at play.
As you're speaking, I cannot help but think even of the entire, social media ecosystem and how it has rapidly evolved, where a lot of people, even companies and individuals, seem to be operating on this very paradigm that you are describing. How then does one maintain their identity, their sense of value, and operating from that place of wisdom when it looks like the rest of the world has lost their head?
This is such a fundamental question at the personal level, at the societal level as well, because we're forgetting something that we innately know how to do, but we are distracted by the many stimuli that we receive on a daily basis. What we need to do is get out of the fear place. FOMO is fear-based decision-making. So when we get out of the place of fear and get into the place of facts, we get out of that doom loop. And what tends to happen when we make decisions based on FOMO is that we're way more focused on what we feel that we lack than what we actually have. Like when people feel FOMO because they see a party on Instagram, they're way more focused on, I don't have this thing that I think I want right now. And they're not thinking about all the wonderful things they already do have in their life. So it's a trick that our mind plays on us to focus on scarcity versus abundance. And so what people need to do, and listen, it's a battle that I fight every day in my own life, so I certainly know what it feels like, is when you feel a feeling of FOMO, or you think you do, step back, get away from the screen, take a deep breath and say, what do I really want to do here? What is my objective? What is my goal? Not what that person's doing, not what that country is doing. What is mine? And then once you do that, you can take sensible decisions.
And how can leaders measure whether they are taking and making sensible decisions, or whether they're making decisions out of fear? How do they, get to that place of being able to quantify whether it's FOMO or strategic, wise planning?
Yeah, I mean, it is a great point that you make, because we're not saying, my message here isn't to say to policymakers, don't look at what your fellow countries are doing, your competitors, your allies. We want to learn from each other. That is one of the beauties of our international system, is that it is a laboratory for new policy that we can learn from. What I am saying is, when you go to make that policy, there is a trade-off between speed and wisdom. and you want to be able to be relevant. You want to move fast enough to be relevant. But if you are moving so fast that you are not incorporating voices that are different than yours, if you're not incorporating expert voices, if you're not questioning your action as you make the plan, then the chances are that you are going to do something that is much more based on the passions of the moment than on a long-term plan of where you want to take your country. And so this, again, comes down to what we want from our policymakers, which is wisdom and gathering data and making decisions that will, in the long term, last and stand the test of time. And so, again, I think it's about bringing together a diverse set of voices, bringing data into the equation, getting out of the fear place, and basing decisions based on facts.
Patrick J. McGuinness, thank you for a very sober and wise conversation today. I think it works on both government level as well as corporate, but even and perhaps more fundamentally so on an individual level, because ultimately it is individuals behind both government and corporate. We thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Patrick J. McGuinness. He's a venture capitalist and author of Fear of Missing Out. I tell you what, that book is worth a read.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet. Channel 628.
So we take you now to the second day of the IBT Presidential Summit. It has shifted the focus today from policy vision to practical implementation. There have also been discussions centered around how innovative building technologies can be supported and funded at scale. Financial institutions, development financiers, as well as government entities are engaging on the risks, the opportunities, and the funding models needed to move IBTs beyond pilot projects. Our reporter Lebohang Mabange has more.
As South Africa looks to accelerate the rollout of innovative building technologies, access to funding and investor confidence remain critical. On day 2 of the summit, financiers outlined what is needed to unlock investment and move IBTs from concept to delivery. Zandile Sibiya from the Banking Association South Africa says commercial banks are ready to invest, but structural challenges must still be addressed.
I can safely say here that the member banks are very keen to invest in IBTs, but obviously we note that there are systematic challenges in the sector that need to be addressed. Hence we're here. And we're here to coordinate and work very closely with yourselves to find solutions for improving this market. I think we've been in the piloting stage for a while now, so we need to start getting, our hands dirty, implementing and actually putting everything in place.
Development finance institutions say funding decisions are guided by both traditional lending criteria and the unique risks associated with new technologies. Tolofelo Ramotsehwa from the National Housing Finance Corporation outlined how IBT projects are assessed.
We're looking at character, which of course we gauge the reliability and trustworthiness of the projects and the systems that we are financing. We look at the capital. Is the business well capitalized? Or if it is an SPV model, are there sufficient cash flows? We look at the capacity. Is there growth potential? And is there ability to be able to meet the loan repayments? We look at collateral, which is a form of insurance for the lender ourselves. And lastly, we look at conditions, economic and industry conditions, etc.
Ramotsehwa says while IBTs present new risks, there are clear funding mechanisms that can help reduce uncertainty for lenders.
We will always hear when we are dealing with new technologies, risks related to high upfront capital costs for IBTs. And the recommendation there is that as a mitigant, we need to do bulk procurement of IBT units to reduce per unit costs through scale, and it lowers initial capex hurdles without compromising long-term affordability. Another risk that is always highlighted with new technologies is the perceived technology risk, because the technology is not well known. The mitigant for that, of course, becomes blended capital structures with first loss facilities.
The Infrastructure Fund says blended finance will play a central role in scaling up IBT implementation across the country. Dr. Thami Ngubeni is the Managing Director of the Infrastructure Fund.
Suffice to indicate that The IF is a blended finance platform ready to do business. We want to partner with the department to be able to ensure that the IBT intervention works better. The infrastructure fund is open for business, and we are willing to support the sector to reach its intended objectives.
Day 2 discussions highlight that while innovation is critical, funding structures, risk mitigation, and collaboration between government and financiers will determine whether IBTs are implemented at scale. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Lebogang Mabange in Johannesburg, South Africa.
It's gone exactly 4:52 Central African time, and we are getting ready to move over from the English language broadcast to the French desk, and standing by to give us a sneak peek of what they've got in store for us on Vue d'Afrique. We say bonjour to you, Joël.
Bonjour à toi, Thami. Bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Sur Vue d'Afrique, tout à l'heure, il sera question du parquet de Tripoli qui a ouvert une enquête alors que les circonstances de l'assassinat de Saif al-Islam Kadhafi illustrent le chaos en Libye. Nous parlerons également de la célébration ce 4 février de la journée mondiale contre le cancer, et nous aurons également en deuxième partie des nouvelles du sport avec Jolino Sungu. C'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique. Merci Thami.
Merci beaucoup. That's Joël coming up at the top of the hour with Vue d'Afrique.
The sound of Africa is evolving. Experience our new mobile app. Free to download, free to connect.
It is exactly 4:53 Central African time. Now, ABSA says that South Africa's new energy vehicle, the NEV market, is growing steadily, but growing, with vehicle sales increasing sharply in the recent years. To test the country's readiness for wider adoption, 2 ABSA executives recently completed a 3-day electric vehicle journey covering more than 4,000 kilometers from Johannesburg to Gqeberha in the Eastern Cape. One of the executives, Tebogo Mapotoma, executive for operations and enablement at ABSA Vehicle Asset Finance, says the journey highlighted the ongoing infrastructure gaps, the limited consumer awareness, and broader ecosystem challenges that could slow the NEV transition. For more on this, we joined on the line by Zinzile Galega, Executive for Strategy and Customers at ABSA Insurance. A very good afternoon to you, Zinzile. Good to have you with us on African Business.
Good afternoon, Thami. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon.
Well, glad that you're back, glad that you're safe, glad that you're here to tell the tale. Could you take us through your experiences of the 3-day electric vehicle journey?
No, of course, myself and a group of other colleagues made our way down to Gqeberha on a 3-day, really historic journey. And it was just the time that was leading up to the South African Auto Week. Of course, we know Gqeberha to be the largest exporter of vehicle production in South Africa. And really our mission, Thami, was we wanted to showcase a range of electric vehicles and also just to demonstrate the infrastructure that currently exists here in South Africa. I must tell you, it was my first experience in an electric vehicle, so it did take a bit of acclimatizing just to equip myself in terms of understanding how it works. I must tell you that I was highly impressed by the quiet engine, very impressed by the intuitive tech suite as well. But I must tell you that I also learned a new term, range anxiety, and that would be just the equivalent of someone who would be in a internal combustion engine vehicle where you see that red light coming up and you're trying to do a back of the matchbox calculation in terms of when the next garage would be. And so fortunately, I was in a hybrid vehicle, which means that I had the backup of petrol in the event that I was out of range. But I must say that for me, definitely an eye-opener. I had never sort of opened my eyes in terms of what's available from an infrastructure perspective for anybody who wants to purchase an electric vehicle. But we made it safely to Gqeberha with many stories to tell. And of course, triggering just some thoughts on what it would take for us as South Africa to increase the adoption and educate ourselves on electric vehicles.
And on that very note, Zinzile, from your assessment, how ready is the country, South Africa, for a large-scale transition to the new energy vehicles? And are we likely to see the new energy vehicles being manufactured for the mass market in the near future?
I think, Thami, like any transition, it would take a path to getting to readiness for us. I think there are a couple of considerations to make to get to that path of readiness. We need to think about re-educating our society. We would need to think about upskilling the workforce and just think differently around energy as well as skills and as well as just the path to readiness for the adoption of vehicles. We already know that there is a confidence in South Africa in terms of producing vehicles in mass, and then that would attract investors into South Africa to enable us to produce electric vehicles.
All right, and perhaps we'll leave it at that for today. And well done. What a great experience that you've had, and certainly one that can feed into the adoption of NEVs in the country, realizing the barriers that still exist and the opportunities that are there as well. We thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Thami.
And before I let you go, just by way of interest, did you drive back on an NEV or did you fly back to Johannesburg?
So because of time constraints, I flew back. I got the experience and I understand and I see where the opportunities are and the gaps. And so I brought back all the experience and the lessons.
But one trip was enough.
Via flight.
Thank you so much, Zinzile. Have a great evening further. Thank you. That's Zinzile Galega. She's Executive for Strategy and Customer at ABSA Insurance. What a trek that they made, 4,000 kilometers from Johannesburg to Gqeberha. But as you could hear, lots of opportunity, but still so many gaps. And this is such a beautiful experiential way of finding out how far adoption is and where the opportunities lie within the new energy vehicle market and sector. Well, that is how we come to the end of this Wednesday edition of Africa in Business. It certainly has been very busy. And also you would have heard of the official renewal of AGOA by Donald Trump. That happened earlier on today. Not much that's different, really, and we have been discussing this for the past few months. So it is now a fait accompli, AGOA renewed. With that, Africa, we'll see you tomorrow, and restez connectés as we hand the reins over now to the French desk and Vue d'Afrique. Au revoir.
For 60 years, Channel Africa has connected the continent. Celebrate the journey. Celebrate the African perspective.
Vue d'Afrique, un magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi avec Joël Mouteba sur Channel Africa de 15h à 16h, temps universel. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.